They say that flying has never been cheaper, but is that actually true? The seats have never been smaller, and it feels like you have to pay extra for every little thing, but some airlines do advertise flights as low as $19.
But if you actually look at the numbers, flying has gotten more expensive, at least in recent years. In this video, we're breaking down how airfare pricing has evolved since the so-called golden age, and why some flights today cost you more, even when they look cheaper. So are airlines just getting sneakier with how they charge us, or has flying actually become more accessible? People oftentimes view the 1950s and 60s as the golden age of flying, where you dressed in formal attire and sat in comfortable recliners and were fed gourmet meals. And this was true. Flying was considered a luxury, and airlines promoted air travel as a glamorous experience. But it was a luxury experience that came at a luxury price. The average person could not afford to fly. In 1957, a round-trip domestic ticket would cost around $300, which is equivalent to over $3,000 today. So air travel was a huge expense. At this point, most regular people relied on trains and buses to travel long distances. All of this started to change after airline deregulation. Before 1978, the government controlled pretty much everything about the airline industry, which airlines flew where and how much they could charge. But in 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed into law the Airline Deregulation Act, which gave this power to the airlines themselves. Very quickly, deregulation led to the creation of new airlines, and existing airlines had to rapidly expand service in order to compete. As competition increased, fares started to decrease, making air travel more accessible to the average person. We saw an interesting pattern start to emerge post-deregulation, which was the hub and spoke model. Most airlines had been operating point-to-point systems, but after deregulation, airlines began operating hubs that they would funnel passengers into and out of, and many airlines still use this model today. Now, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for the airlines though, because some of them struggled to adapt to this new environment. There became a large focus on cost cutting and revenue optimization, and this environment set the stage for the unbundling of airfares, where services once included in ticket prices are now sold separately. Back in the day, things like seat selection, checked bags, and in-flight meals were all commonplace on a flight, guaranteed as part of your ticket. But in the early 2000s, that all started to change. Airlines began charging for checked bags first, and then slowly but surely have started to charge for every little thing. This model has completely altered the way that the airlines do business. This type of income is known as ancillary revenue, and this type of revenue has increased from 5% in 2010 up to almost 18% in 2023. This type of income is much more consistent for the airlines because it isn't subject to variation in fares. They can always charge the same amount for a checked bag. While the airlines might love these fees, it's really not great for the customer experience. Consumers often perceive the bundled services as a better value, even if they don't utilize all of the pieces. Studies have shown that as ancillary fees increase, perceptions of price fairness decrease. So consumers really are not fans of this model. Now, I will say that the access to these lower base fares has actually opened up aviation and flying to people who otherwise could not afford it. It allows people to take these bare bones flights with no seats or bags and be able to afford to travel. So while people who are already flying aren't necessarily fans of the unbundling model, it has expanded the overall market. Some airlines that take unbundling to a whole new level are low-cost and ultra-low-cost airlines. Airlines like Frontier, Spirit, and Ryanair, those are all ultra-low-cost airlines where you are only paying to be on the plane. You don't get a carry-on, you don't get to choose your seat, and you definitely don't get any food or drink unless you pay up. These airlines started to emerge post-deregulation, but they've really amped up in recent years. The success of low-cost airlines has actually forced major airlines to lower their prices and adapt their pricing models in order to compete. Most major airlines have adopted basic categories of fares where you can't pick a seat, and some are even getting rid of carry-ons for basic economy as well. Now, there are a few other ways that airlines have cut costs. Airlines really began to prioritize fuel efficiency after the oil crisis of 1973, and that has only gotten more important as fuel prices have continued to rise. Fuel-efficient planes like the Boeing 737 MAX and Airbus A320neo can save airlines up to 15% on fuel compared to the previous models. Another big component is load factors. Back in the late 70s, load factors, aka how full a plane is, were around 55%. But since then, that number has grown to about 80% in recent years, indicating that airlines are maximizing use of their aircrafts. One way airlines are able to ensure high load factors is by purposefully overbooking their flights. I'm sure we've all experienced the gate agent asking for volunteers to take a later flight, but the airline is really betting on people missing their flights, so they overbook by a few seats. And oftentimes, that bet ends up working out for them. Now, speaking of this, airlines also improved their load factors by implementing the hub and spoke model I already talked about. Airlines are able to gauge demand for direct routes through their hub connections and are able to meet passenger demand wherever necessary. Now, the hub and spoke model is definitely not perfect, and many low-cost carriers prefer to stick to the point-to-point network, where they can take advantage of the routes that mainline carriers don't fly. Now, cutting costs behind the scenes really doesn't matter unless the airlines are passing those savings on to customers. What really matters to passengers is the price they actually pay to fly. So let's look at how airfare prices have changed over time and what they look like today. As I said previously, following the Airline Deregulation Act, airfare costs significantly decreased. Even looking at numbers as recently as 1990, the average domestic round-trip ticket adjusted for inflation fell from $648 in 1990 to $420 in 2019. However, most of that change occurred before 2005, and since then, ticket prices have actually been increasing. Airlines have been consolidating big time since 2005, and fuel costs began to increase during the '08 recession as well. Now, we did see a unique change in 2020, where we experienced a sharp decline in air travel demand, and therefore a sharp drop in ticket prices. That average has since recovered, but it's actually still lower than 2019. Another thing you'll notice is the cost difference between basic economy and premium economy or business has actually widened over the past 20 years. Premium economy seats can cost 1.5 to 3 times more than standard economy seats, and business can be even more than that. You'll also see this price difference when you're looking at ultra low-cost airlines like Frontier and Spirit compared to full-service airlines like Delta and United. These airlines have really started to take off since the early 2000s, and like I've mentioned, these airlines are able to charge rock-bottom prices. And if you're able to travel with just a backpack, they can be a really great deal. But unfortunately, a lot of people get sucked in by the low base fare, but after add-ons, they can oftentimes spend just as much to fly on these budget airlines as they would have to fly a full-service carrier. For example, flying from LaGuardia to Myrtle Beach on Delta is going to run you about $154 one way. This includes a carry-on, seat selection, and snacks on board. You can also fly this route on Spirit Airlines, where it will cost you just $87 as a base fare. However, if you want a carry-on and seat selection, that will be $147. And if you wanted a soda and snack on board, you're now paying more than the $154 that you would have paid on Delta. Now, I do want to be clear that that is definitely not always the case. You can certainly find lower priced flights even with add-ons on low-cost airlines, but I just wanted to share an example of how sometimes the prices can be deceptive. Now, there are many people that don't even have access to low-cost or ultra low-cost airlines. Travelers from smaller or more rural communities oftentimes face higher airfares compared to those flying between major hubs. A round-trip flight from, say, Billings, Montana to Chicago will run you about $250. But from New York, you can consistently find a round-trip flight for less than $100. A lot of the time, the reason for this is because one airline has the monopoly on a route and is able to charge whatever they please. One stat I found from 2015 showed that one single airline controlled a majority of the market at 40 of the 100 largest airports in the US, and I'm pretty sure that number has only increased. In 2000, there were 10 airlines that controlled 80% of the US domestic market, and nowadays there are just 4. So where does this leave us? It's clear that flying today is a totally different experience than it was 50 or even 20 years ago. If you look at it from a price standpoint, yes, on average, flying is cheaper than the so-called golden age of the 1950s and 60s. But it is a little more complicated than that. In my opinion, the real golden era of flying was the 90s, where fares were low and everything was included. Airlines have figured out how to make base fares look low while tacking on fees from everything from choosing a seat to bringing a carry-on. If you live near a major hub and don't mind packing light, you actually might come out ahead. But if you're flying out of a smaller airport, trying to travel with kids, or on short notice, you're probably still paying quite a bit. What's interesting now is that we're entering a whole new phase of uncertainty. The pandemic and post-pandemic rebound completely shifted the airline market, and while some areas have fully recovered, others are still struggling. Airlines are currently facing economic uncertainty and environmental pressures, and as the use of AI increases, we're going to start seeing it implemented in ways that could change the industry, whether we like it or not. It's hard to say whether prices will continue to increase or decrease, or maybe one day we'll all be paying a subscription in order to fly. But I always hear about how flying is so much cheaper these days, so I really wanted to dig into the data and facts of the current situation. Let me know how you think air travel is going to change in the coming decades in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!